But if you have any questions, if you can put them in the chat box, which is at the bottom, then they can be collated and we can try and talk at them at the end. So the plan for today really is I'm going to give a short introduction, and then the other speakers are going to give a short introduction as well, and then we're going to go through a few sort of discussion points really, and hopefully throw some questions in there as well, and discuss some of the issues there. So I just want to sort of it's a massive topic, and I think we could talk, people study PhDs on this topic and they still haven't got the answers. So we're not going to be able to solve all the problems in this discussion, but I think it hopefully will help create some of the chat, and hopefully lead to people wanting to go out and find out more and think of more ideas and action. So just briefly, what does diversity mean? And we know that diversity is important. So diversity means difference. And in agriculture, we talk about it all the time. You know, we talk about grass fields needing a diverse sward for better soil health and for better nutrition. We talk about genetics, and we need lots of different types of genetics for better animals. We talk about farming businesses needing to diversify. So we talk about that, but what about people? We don't mention about people, and especially brown and black people, as being diversity in the farming and agricultural sector. So it's really a topic that doesn't really get discussed enough. And if we talk about part of diversity, which is race, again, we really don't talk about this topic. And I think the problem is it makes people become comfortable, and it's a very difficult subject to talk about. But I think it needs to be talked about, because we really have issues if we don't answer, we don't talk about it, and what happens if these issues persist. So it's really good that we can have spaces where we can talk about it, and I think the discussion really has to be broader and bigger and involve more people, but it's really, really important. Now, the important thing about race is it is a difficult topic to discuss, and therefore I think we need to really respect the subject and the speakers today, because this is a really personal subject to be talking about, and I think it takes a lot of courage to talk about it, and so I won't tolerate any insulting language or insulting questions. It's important that we listen and we learn something from today, if anything. And our sector really needs to be able to embrace these sort of discussions. So when we talk about diversity and race, we live in a country that's 33%, where 33% of primary school children are ethnic minority, 25% of secondary school children are ethnic minority. In fact, 18.5% of the whole country is an ethnic minority. Now, if you put that into numbers, compare that, that's the population of Wales and Scotland put together. Yet the number of people working agriculture is less than 1%. So would we be happy having an agricultural workforce in this country that only had 1% Scottish and Welsh workers? No. So again, we need to think about, why are people of ethnic minorities not working in agriculture or not being supported or promoted to join agriculture? The final thing I really want to talk about is race and ethnicity and what they mean, because really, we need to start at the basis. Now, race is a social construct. There's no genetic basis to race, and it was created as a power structure between different people. So some races are at the top of the power and some races are below, and because this power structure is so interwoven into our society, therefore barriers exist. And therefore, we need to be able to discuss these topics to understand where those barriers are and therefore how we can break them. But we need to start at a starting point, that it's human created, this whole notion of race. Okay, ethnicity is slightly different because it's more about your heritage, where you were born, where you were raised, where you come from, and things like that. But race is created by humans to exert power, really. So I think it's really important that we do discuss this, and I think we've got, the other big thing is we have this definition of people of colour, or black and Asian and minority and ethnic, but what you can see on this panel is we're all part of the same group, but we've all got our individual experiences and backgrounds, and so I think it's really important that we'll all have different takes on the same sort of topic, and it's interesting to listen to. So what I want to do is I want to start, I want the panelists to share. So thank you for contributing to the session. I want to welcome the panelists. They're all involved in agriculture in their own ways. They're all passionate about working in agriculture, and I think that will show. So again, they're all part of the same community. So I'm just going to go across my screen and let them go. So Esme, would you mind introducing yourself and giving a little short introduction?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Steve. So my name's Esme and I work currently at St Werburgh City Farm in Bristol. And although that's been my first kind of experience of working in agriculture, I was lucky enough to grow up in the countryside and kind of experience the countryside from a young age, and experiencing that in a way that was kind of, it didn't feel like I didn't have access to those spaces. And part of that is because I am very light-skinned, mixed race, which afforded me a certain amount of privilege in those spaces. And, you know, growing up in a small community, there was a certain amount of acceptance there that a lot of people who are from ethnic minorities haven't experienced. So at St Werburgh City Farm, I've been working there for the last 2 years, and last October we started having conversations at the farm, which are ones that had existed before I worked there, but it's a kind of workforce of around 40 people, kind of full and part-time staff, and there is, you know, there's gender diversity. Well, it kind of tips in the other direction, so there's actually like a predominantly female workforce, but despite being in one of the most diverse areas of Bristol, it is in fact, it's got incredibly low ethnic diversity within the staff, and also it's kind of the patronage at the city farm is quite demographically specific. It tends to be kind of slightly wealthier, more middle class people. I use these terms loosely because I know kind of describing people by characteristics is a nebulous area, but I'm just kind of trying to characterize that for you. So the piece of work was around, and it's kind of coming to a close now, sorry, exploring barriers to access for Black, Asian and minority ethnic people in accessing the city farm, but also kind of getting a feel of people's relationships to green spaces and their sense of being able to access them. So yeah, I'm here not representing the farm, but I'm drawing on my own experiences and representing myself. So I just want to say that first and foremost, that actually I'm just, you know, I'm not talking from the perspective as an employee representing. I'm talking just as myself. And yeah, so we'll probably dig into a little bit later the kind of the specifics that have come up in the research. But I think, you know, like the main things that come up were actually things that were confirmed for me through my own experience and understanding. And it's like one of the biggest things that we do is, you know, we're kind of, as people, we're discouraged from stepping into areas of fear. And kind of, if it's something that seems scary, it's something to be avoided. And there's a real culture in our country of kind of, you know, like avoid fear, avoid pain. And actually, you know, if you take it out of the context of learning about something new and scary like racial diversity, which is a sensitive and loaded subject, you know, let's take something like, I don't know, business, for example. If you're an entrepreneur and you're starting your own business, it's kind of an expectation that you build the resilience to navigate fear. Expect that it's going to come up, expect that you're going to face new challenges, and you know, the success or failure of a business is how well you navigate fear and move through it, how many times you risk getting things wrong and trying it again in a different way. And it's kind of the resilience to keep moving through that is kind of the key part of you know, building your successful business. As you can probably tell, I also work as a business coach for entrepreneurs, so this is kind of it's a lot of mindset stuff that I work with. But that, you know, that's a big thing. It's kind of, it's a very sensitive area. And I think a lot of us, when we feel our kind of sensitive buttons pushed around something that is kind of triggering for us, or it requires us to examine part of ourselves that feels uncomfortable, we clam up and we're like, oh, how can I skirt around this? How can I outsource this? So it comes to this point where companies know they have to do something, but even then people are trying to outsource. You know, can we get a consultant in to kind of fix the race problem, or can we, you know, kind of find other ways of navigating this without actually kind of facing our own assumptions about people? and kind of accepting that some of those are going to be challenging and hard to work through. So some of the really key findings, I mean, we talked to a lot of people. We spoke to kind of experts, which I'm saying with bunny ears, because those are people who are positioned as community leaders within the community, and also some people of colour who work within kind of agricultural sectors and kind of within the green sector generally. But we also went out and spoke to individuals, members of the public within the kind of the community reaching around the farm, just to get the general sense. One of the biggest things we do is we make assumptions about people based on stereotypes, and I think we all know we do that. But that kind of, you know, we make assumptions about things that are quite culturally, I suppose, amplified, like, you know, oh, you know, black people don't like the countryside, or there's, you know, there's cultural complications there. And I think what we do is we take these assumptions, which do come from a place of some information, and they're usually coming from, you know, like rumors don't, you know, there's no smoke without fire. But I think, you know, so there's always something around this, but what we do is we see that as a stop and divert point, as opposed to, okay, you know, we've got this assumption, how do we test this assumption? How do we find out whether this assumption is true or not? And how do we kind of work out navigating that? So I think we make a lot of assumptions about people's relationships, and then we decide what that assumption means. And rather than finding the nuance in that and going, okay, well, you know, there may be some cultural resistance to the idea of going outdoors, but is that reinforced by how we present the outdoors to people? And is it reinforced by ideas that kind of, you know, it's kind of amplification of common narratives, which both stop us from stepping up to that work, you know, as people who work in the industry, and it also stops other people from kind of stepping into that space, because it very much says, this space isn't for you. So I think, you know, it's about having conversations with people and kind of being, yeah, opening yourself up to being wrong, opening yourself up to be like, it's committing to being in discomfort as a process of learning. So it's like, okay, this is going to be uncomfortable, like anything we learn. When we learn to ride a bike, we're going to fall off. Like, expect discomfort and just kind of be brave with it. And, you know, that's a big part of the process. I guess there's a lot more to say about it, but I think that's one of the main things is our assumptions. I've got pages of notes, but I'm hoping through the questions and stuff and some other prompts I can focus in a little bit on some of those, because I appreciate I'm rambling a little. But yeah, those are kind of some of my thoughts to start off with. Thank you.
Thank you, Esme. That's very interesting. And I think, yeah, I think looking at those barriers has been, and the work you've done, I think is really important. I think not only for the farm, but for the wider industry, which when I did mention, I've mentioned it a few times, and people are quite keen to find out those sort of findings, which is great. Okay, so can we go next to Harriet, who can introduce herself, which would be interesting.
Hello. So yeah, I'm Harriet, and I graduated from the Royal Agricultural University in 2018, and I've been working since then for a leading drinks brand in quality and compliance. And I'm just going to talk a bit about my experience and understanding of allyship and the importance of improving access to Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities, to agriculture, and also to the countryside as a whole. So to kind of give everyone my interpretation of allyship, it's the act of inclusion and emphasis of social justice by the in-group to the advance of the out-group. So in the context of agriculture and myself, allyship is me standing up for the out-group, so say Black, Asian and minority ethnic groups, and working towards increasing their access to agriculture. And the importance of allyship was actually really well put by the author Bernadine the Barrister in her Desert Island Discs, which was on a few weeks ago. It's a really good one, actually. And she said, the people who most care about change are the people who are most adversely affected by the status quo. but the people who can make the biggest difference are often the people who may not feel that they are directly adversely affected by the fact that people are being excluded due to their race, for example. White people need to be on board and at least party to the conversations we have around race. And obviously this is already happening. Loads of doors are opening and there's lots of great organizations, but it's just allyship to me is kind of everyone holding themselves accountable. And when that happens, that's when it will be effective. So everyone, irrespective of their race or ethnicity, has access to agriculture. So kind of to give a bit more context on why I'm here, as I said, I went to the RAU, Royal Agricultural University, and I decided in, I think, June, to write a letter with my friend Natalie Chiku to the university requesting that they address the sort of social injustice met by some students and the racism and discrimination that was happening and that was faced by my friend Natalie, and that was kind of accepted and not challenged by many people. And we kind of, as well as giving the university a sort of push to change, we also wanted to give them the opportunity to really step up and have real influence in agriculture, because they feed into agriculture and land management and countryside in general. We felt that if they fostered a more inclusive environment with students, that this would then trickle on to agriculture itself. Because in my opinion, inclusion has to happen first for diversity to be achieved. And historically, the onus has always been on people to fight their way in, rather than the other way around. And if the way we can change this is if every single white person or anyone who feels that they are in group in agriculture really works for and makes access more achievable for everyone on the outside. I also just quickly wanted to mention, some of you may have seen Countryfile's investigation by Dwayne Fields into BAME communities' access and feelings towards the British countryside. And you may have seen that this investigation vexed quite a few people on Twitter, and it kind of fired up the tabloids into saying that Countryfile's deeming that the countryside is racist, which was just not the case. Well, in my opinion, I didn't think it was. But what it did do is give a classic example of white fragility. And one tweet actually is quite a good one. So they said, "Britain is historically populated by white people. What on earth is stopping anyone, regardless of the colour of their skin, enjoying nature? No one is stopping anyone." And while I'm talking about the countryside, this kind of agriculture obviously falls into this as well. And if you don't know, white fragility is a label for the defensiveness and even just discomfort that is felt by a white person when they're being even just informed about racial inequality. It doesn't, not necessarily being challenged or anything. It could just be from, a TV show. And I think the reason some people reacted in such a way to Countryfile is they felt that the British countryside had kind of been put in a box and labelled as racist, which isn't what they were doing at all. But even if they were, it kind of, all that needed to happen is people to kind of take their own discomfort and look at themselves and their own communities and see if it's representative of British society today. And kind of, as Steve was saying, 18.5% of the country is minority ethnic. So if you're looking at your own community, is that representative of British society, or isn't it? So, and why isn't it? And to give kind of more personal examples, so the schools I went on lots of camping trips to national parks and things like that. I wouldn't feel apprehensive of going camping in, say, the Peak District. And that isn't just because I've grown up in the countryside, it's because I have access to it, and because I have personal experience to draw on and comfort. And going again back to the tweet that said, no one is stopping anyone, it's not entirely correct, because certain demographics are proportionally encouraged more than others. And this doesn't mean that people from it doesn't mean that people from BAME communities are actively discouraged, or people are unwelcome, but they aren't exclusively welcomed or actively encouraged. And people from cities are less likely, obviously, to go to the countryside, but that this isn't just because they're there. It's because of access. So I am from South Northamptonshire, and I can just walk out my garden onto a footpath, but I do live in London in normal times, and statistically I'm more likely to decide to go to a national park for the weekend, even if someone from a minority ethnic group is geographically closer. And actually, they mention in Country Files some figures from Natural England from 2017 that showed only a quarter of the Black and Asian community are likely to visit the countryside every week, compared to almost half of the white community. And then finally, sorry, I'm rambling. So Country File also actually mentioned Julian Glover's Landscapes Review for DEFRA, which was published in September 2019, and had a read of this, and in it says, sometimes on our visits it has felt as if the national parks are an exclusive, mainly white, mainly middle class club with rules only members understand, and much too little is done to encourage first-time visitors. The figures show a lack of diversity, and the way to overcome this is by increasing access and inclusion. And sorry, one more thing. I'm kind of also alluding to white privilege while I'm talking about this. And obviously there are some white people, because this is quite often something that vexes people, and there are some white people in the UK who also probably don't have access to agriculture and wouldn't feel like a career in farming is achievable. But all I'm saying is that their race isn't also a barrier to this. And kind of, so the first step really to overcoming this is acknowledging that you were previously misinformed or ignorant to other people's needs. And then in that way, we can kind of break down the numerous structures of our society that really benefit one demographic. So that's it from me for now.
Thank you, Harriet. That's really, really interesting, and it is a great perspective to come to hear about how you've sort of learned about the allyship and how you see things as well. And Harriet did work with one of her friends called Natalie, and looking at how to sort of decolonize the curriculum and looking at education and the education establishments, the agricultural education establishments, and how do we deal with racism, or dealing with, and especially if we're trying to recruit a wide variety of students and diverse students into education establishments, especially agricultural establishments, how do we support them? So Harriet is quite vocal, and hopefully we'll have more of that a bit later on about things you've tried to do at the RAU, which is great. So next along is Uma, who will introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Uma. I'm a fourth year vet student at the University of Surrey at the moment. I think unlike quite a few people on here, I grew up in Kent, but it's not quite that countryside-y. I was more in a town. I didn't really have any access to farms unless my parents were willing to drive me there. essentially. And that still continued on into the first couple of years of vet school for me. So while a lot of my peers maybe had access to lambing because they knew people or they lived nearby to the places, I had to travel quite far away to find like lambing and dairy farms that would take me. So I've had quite restricted access to agriculture sort of in my early life, but maybe not as much as other people, because luckily I sort of had the family support that could take me to these places to get the experience, and I'm quite grateful for it, because now I am considering going into the agricultural industry as a vet. And I'm also quite lucky because the University of Surrey has quite a few diverse and people of colour teaching the curriculum, but I guess they only really have or had one person of colour teaching sort of the farm side, which was, to be fair, quite inspiring to see, because I haven't really seen that many people of colour in agriculture myself, even as I've been travelling around, and there's not really that many people of colour in the vet school itself. But the people of colour that I have seen in the veterinary industry aren't really, they're more small animal vets. So it's quite hard to see where you fit in personally, because you don't have sort of role models, which is what I think is quite important for people to see. So I think like encouraging people into agriculture is really great, but you do need the inclusion as well, because we've also seen or heard accounts from students within vet school when they have been on agricultural placements that they've had sort of racist encounters with the farmers, and we've been sort of brushed off that this is like okay, this is kind of like what they behave like sometimes, which is really obviously off-putting for a lot of people who do want to go into agriculture, especially young people. I think it would be really easy to put them off by just accepting and not really following through any sort of negative consequences of students receiving racist remarks while on placements. And sort of even people's peers are quite similar to that, where they do brush it off also, because the university does the same. Oh, it's just farmers, this is what farmers are like. Sort of that's the thing that you have to accept. Or maybe that's, I think one girl said that she had been told, oh, like, because you're black, people won't relate to you, so you can't be like a farmer or a vet, a farm vet, which is quite negative. And I think sort of like inclusion obviously does have to come first if you're going to include the diversity, increase the diversity, which is the main problem. But that, I think it should probably start much earlier in people's lives to encourage them to go out and have experiences in agriculture, because I think you're less likely to go and do that as you get older. It becomes not as accessible as when you're younger and able to go, or like encouraged to go with schools, etc., and stuff like that. So I think, especially as not as like a generalization, but a lot of sort of BAME communities are more city based, and so maybe their only access would be through schools, which is why I think it's quite important to start there to encourage the diversity in agriculture. Unfortunately, unlike the others, I don't think I have a lot too much to say because I am just a student, but we're really trying to look within the university and work with the university to sort of encourage like widening participation and outreach and stuff like that. But because it's not specifically veterinary, isn't specifically agriculture, I think it's easy to have them brush off into different directions rather than focus on sort of the farming aspect of it. But yeah, I think that's all I have to share.
Thanks, Omar. So you're not just a student. I think you've done some really good things with regards to diversity, which I think which we'll hopefully share later. But I think, you know, the vets are part of the agricultural industry, especially farm vets. And if we compare, we look at sectors, the agricultural sector is the whitest sector in the country at less than 1%. Now, animal sciences is not far behind with 3%. Okay, and then if we put that in context, think about the construction industry. We probably think we're not that far off them. 7% ethnic minorities, and the army's got 10%. So, you know, animal sciences and agriculture together are very, very low, and they don't reflect the general population, yet they serve the general population. So there are some barriers, and it's something that maybe we'll discuss in a minute. But I think what you've done at the vet school, I think it's the same issues. You know, trying to break those barriers is very similar to breaking the barriers in the agricultural industry. So that's great. So Flavian, do you want to talk next?
Yeah. Afternoon. Can everyone hear me? Yeah, afternoon guys. I'm Flavian, and I'm a pig farmer in East Sussex near Brighton. So I've been working in the pig industry since 2009, and I got into the job, I'd say by accident, because I was doing work experience to do vet medicine, and then I realized that my grades and my work ethic wasn't going to cut doing 5 years in uni. So I ended up doing a week's work experience on a farm concreting instead of working with pigs. And I got a job there, worked for 2.5 years, and that's how my journey in British farming started. I'd say I agree with the girls that said there's definitely not enough access for people of ethnic minority that don't live near countryside. Like it's like a world on its own. So until I went to the farm, I didn't even know these things existed, even though it was only 2 junctions down the motorway from me. So yeah, I definitely agree with the girls that things need to be done even from school. Let's say inner city schools need to have our partnerships with agricultural colleges, taking kids even as young as 4, 5, 6 years old to start seeing these things. So as they grow up, I think actually I went to a farm when I was in year 3, and I saw some goats and some sheep. Maybe that's a job I could do. Whereas you're expecting someone that's finished A-level, living in central London, to suddenly think, oh, I'm going to get a job on a farm. It's not going to happen. So the access side of things definitely needs to be improved. And then with regards to race and ethnicity in agriculture, so I don't know if you guys saw, I did an article back in, I think, lockdown has made this year feel like 1 month. It's just all merged into one. But I think it's about May time. And I did this article, and the title was Casual Racism in Agriculture. And that was, I think it was meant to be quite a punchy title to get to draw someone in. And it did that because some of the comments on Facebook were unbelievable. And I've probably got about 50 screenshots on my phone, some horrible comments on there. But I see it as motivation, because in a few years or in 10, whatever years time to come, when I do get enough money and have my own farm and succeed, I'm gonna print these comments, put them on the wall somewhere as as inspiration, and sort of even comment on there and say, look, this is what you were saying about whatever I said. And it's not me vilifying the agriculture industry, because since I started in 2009, like I say, it's always been positive. I'd say 99% of it's been positive. The farm I worked for before, I remember having a car accident when I was 19. When you pass your test, you think you're Lewis Hamilton. I crashed my pilot, and he gave me his Land Cruiser with a fuel card, and he trusted me to use that for 6 months before I went to uni. And this was someone who only knew me for a year. So there are good farmers out there, but unfortunately, the few, let's say 1%, which statistically is non-significant, but still have enough power to make other people with weak views and people that are ignorant to just follow, have these views that are back in, I'd say, 70s and 60s. And as Steve said at the start, genetics, we're going forward. Machinery, we're going forward. Every year we've got Llama, we've got Pig and Poultry Fair, we've got the dairy shows in Southwest. Everyone's looking to go forward, but then our brains are still in the 80s. Why? We need to move along with whatever we're trying to improve in farming. So I'd say definitely not enough has been done in the agriculture industry, or by us farmers to try and encourage people from different backgrounds. It doesn't matter whether it's an African or an Indian or whichever country you're from. I feel if you're not from a farming family, British farming family in this country, you're almost seen as an alien to an extent in the industry. And because I grew up in Kenya until I was 15, I've almost been numb to it, because I grew up among sort of black people among Kenyans. So the only bit of you could compare to this was maybe because we're all from different tribes. There's all that, oh, your tribe does it. So nothing as serious as racism, I'd say, or this sort of the jokiness of, oh, you're light skin, or whatever, like Esme said at the start. That's all sort of in jest, I'd say, amongst a race. But then when I moved here and you look at how people are looking at you, you think, okay, actually, I am different and I'm seen as different, and some things are set not for me, they're set for other people. And I sort of had this mentality of anything that comes in front of me, I'll use it or I'll see it as an obstacle, either jump it or dodge it. And that made me numb to sort of certain comments and or even how I got treated until I'd say this year when the BLM movement started. And I sat back and thought, hang on, why are there people, let's say, living in bigger towns or in a city doing this for people of my race or people of color, and I'm here sat here because it hasn't affected me? Why am I not doing anything? And then since then is when I thought of, okay, I need to be more vocal. I need to try and do as much as I can to encourage more people from of ethnic minorities and different backgrounds into agriculture, and because it's an industry that anyone can do, as long as you're hardworking, as long as you're ready to get up early and be cold and wet, and you like animals or even plants. It's an industry anyone can do. You don't have to be white and born in a family that's farmed 5 generations to do it. Anyone can do agriculture. I've written too many things down here. To resonate what Esme said at the start, it's definitely true that humans fear change. I think it's inbuilt in us that status quo, you're comfortable, that's it. No one wants to talk about it. Even I've got friends that during the whole BLM period, some people I didn't speak to for 3 months because of their views on it. I'm seeing what they're retweeting. When someone says to you they support you, and yet when that issue is brought up at the pub, people just sat there looking around, not saying anything. You think you're either actively supporting someone, as Harriet said about allyship, you're either actively doing something or you're not. And if you're passively supporting, to an extent, it'll be seen as deep down you don't believe in it, but you just sat there sort of liking the odd thing just to be seen as you're doing something, but actually you're not really doing much. And then another point was the link, the way Harriet talked about country file and how they spoke about the countryside. Some of the comments you saw on Twitter that were similar to what I saw on my post in the magazine on Facebook, because after people seeing the Black Lives Matter movement, you've got all these other slogans which have come from that, and they're all almost like counter arguments, because before Black Lives Matter started, when George Floyd died, there wasn't White Lives Matter, there wasn't All Lives Matter. None of that existed until that phrase came along, and then everyone's trying to have counter arguments. And an example I've always said is like in March when people do the 5K or 10K walks for breast cancer, you never hear or see people turn up with a prostate cancer t-shirt saying, are we doing it for prostate cancer? So I think there's times and days for everything. Like this month is Black History Month. It's not saying that white people don't have history or saying Asians don't have history. It's just for this month, we're going to focus on Black history, and then we'll do another culture another time. And I think it boils down back to the fear thing, because if you feel like attention is going away from you, other people are going up, sort of are becoming more equal to you, then you get scared because you think, okay, if we're all equal, then what? And I think it all boils down to exposure, education, which would reduce ignorance, and then in turn that would have more diversity in the industry. That's all I've got to say for now, I think.
Thanks, Flavian. Yeah, I think you're very brave to write that article in the Farmers Weekly, and I think you know, when you do something like that, you're exposed to a lot of people, and there's no moderation. especially on their social media, for example. So unfortunately, you get to see the good, the bad, and the ugly, all in one place. And I think the difficulty is, it's, you know, people could be uncomfortable about talking about racism, but imagine trying to experience it, imagine living it. And I think that's the real difficulty. And I think, you know, when we talk about racism, you know, people assume it's just the using the N word or the P word or things like that. And if you don't see that, racism doesn't exist. But I think, you know, there are other levels to racism. And I think one thing in your article, which was quite strong, was things like microaggressions. You talked about microaggressions, polite racism almost, which, you know, was actually probably more mentally tiring than the strong stuff. So I just want to talk to the panel now, and just open up a little bit more discussion. I think we've all talked about barriers to working in agriculture, and I think there's no one barrier, but there are a few. So what would be nice is just to find out what barriers there are, you know, and we've mentioned a few there, but if we could put them all together. And I think what we'll do is, if Asmay can talk about some of her findings for barriers for the local community using the farm, and then if other people then contribute to what barriers they're facing.
So yeah, before I go into the like specifics, minutiae of like, you know, because there can be any number of individual barriers, which I always think of as individual problems to solve. I think one of the biggest barriers in this work is that if you're, you know, for someone of an ethnic minority, talking about racism is something that we're well versed in and very kind of comfortable in. And I think outside, it seems like it's something that's very much about other people if you don't identify or you aren't from an ethnic minority. So it's kind of, it feels like this dynamic where you're kind of changing the status quo to accommodate some people that aren't currently accommodated, which is the case, but also I think it's really important to look at it from the kind of what actually happens when we make spaces more inclusive. Because, you know, and I'm sure many of us have worked in traditional work settings, and the traditional like hierarchical systems where there are certain expectations for your like, you know, professionalism, behavior, and, you know, it's, so when we go to other things like being neurodiverse, you know, if you have autism or ADHD, or, you know, many people suffer with mental illness or they have complicated family situations. And this is all very human stuff, but there's a very specific way in which we're allowed to act and behave professionally. So it's kind of, we have this rigid expectation of behaviors and difference and things that are acceptable. But actually, I think creating an inclusive environment, like all of the things that we do to create inclusive environments, is actually, I frame it as just meeting basic human needs. So, you know, like when you think about things that you might have to change in the workplace, like making accommodations for people's spiritual practices, like you can think about that across the board. Actually, this is, you know, a good example from our workspace is we had someone come to work there who is a Muslim. And so there was a conversation among management about how to like offer and create accommodations for this person. And then that sparked another conversation actually about kind of opening up space for asking people across the board, regardless of their race, like, do you have any requirements in order for you to feel comfortable in this workspace? So, you know, and then we recruited somebody else at the same time for a similar role. So we asked both of them, do you have any requirements, you know, spiritual requirements, what anything? And actually the person we expected to say yes, which was the Muslim employee, said that they were fine and they had, you know, their own stuff sorted. And the white woman who we also employed, she has a really strong Buddhist spiritual practice. And actually for her to be able to come to work and know that it's okay for her to disappear for 10 minutes to do some meditation is actually, you know, that's increasing her capacity to feel positive in that workspace. That's increasing her capacity to engage with that. So I think, you know, we can frame it as something about making things accessible for this set of people over here, or we can think about it in the real wider context of how do we create spaces where people's basic needs are met, their emotional and mental needs are met. And that's not about, you know, and I'm doing this in bunny ears, like cuddling people or like being softy. Like I'm sure people have lots of ideas about that in workspaces, but actually There's loads of evidence to suggest that if people can show up to work being really honest about who they are and their needs and experiences, and there is an open space to be able to talk about that, that people are much happier in their workspace. They feel much more motivated to contribute. They feel much more part of the team. Like, you know, I suffer with occasional mental health difficulties, and, you know, our working environment, occasionally I'm going to have to take sick days. So do I want, you know, do I phone up my office and say I've got a stomach bug, like, or a headache? Or do I just phone up my office and say, hi, I'm having a mental health day? You know, and that's actually creating, you know, that in my role has created the ability to me to accommodate my very basic needs and also be honest about it. So, you know, and that's at the basic level what inclusion is. It's making everybody feel valued and looked after. What inclusion isn't always doing is kind of including people who are more diverse than ourselves. We make a lot of assumptions about what people's needs are based on our own needs. And often we make assumptions in workplaces when we're setting up about what people's needs are based on this idea of what people should do that's professional. Like a manager doesn't talk about their experiences with mental health or maybe their hidden disability because that seems unprofessional, because we have this very set idea of what that looks like. So I think we need to, one, approach it as like, how can we, you know, be more accommodating of people's needs and generally, but also diversity is about bringing in diverse thought. Like, you know, diversity doesn't just mean racial diversity. You know, in an ever-changing world, bringing in different perspectives from different people enlivens and creates positive things. So for, you know, for understanding a few barriers to bringing somebody into a space, the benefit to being around different people with different thoughts is like, it's magnifying. It's really, yeah. So that was the first thing I wanted to say, which I appreciate is probably a bit of a mouthful, but I think it's just actually our framing just needs to switch a little bit, because then it doesn't become like a big issue. It's like, oh, how can I make everyone feel included? And who are we not including, and how can we bring them in? But I'm going to quickly dip into, Phoebe, just put your hand up if I'm going on for too long, because I'm not actually keeping an eye on the time. But I'm just going to dip into a few things that have come out of our research. And it's really simple. And I understand that the context of what I'm doing with a city farm is different to working out in the countryside in agriculture. But I think a lot of the underlying concepts are the same. So my experience and, you know, from the research can be applied. It just has to be thought about in a slightly different way. I think, you know, a lot of what we do is when we tackle diversity, and that a lot of companies, they create a kind of positive action scheme, or they create something and then they invite people to attend it and then they wonder why they're not showing up. And that's actually just because we're making assumptions about what people's needs are. It's like, it's really simple and really hard because it's the mental challenge of knowing how to tackle this and getting things wrong. But the most basic level, you just need to go and talk to people. You need to be really honest with people. Like, hi, we would really love to welcome more of your community and we want to make space. What do you need? Like asking that question, having straightforward conversations with people. And just acknowledging that actually people who haven't been in a space aren't necessarily going to feel comfortable showing up there. So like going out into people's communities and meeting them in places where they feel comfortable and talking to about their needs there is going to give much better results than expecting people to come to you. So that's something that came up a lot, like invite us. Like we want to come, but we also want to know that when we get there, we're welcome. Like it's very hard, you know, if we can all think of an experience where there's something we're not sure if we belong there. So it takes a certain type of courage to show up to that place. So actually just by extending invitation and welcoming and being really explicit that you want people to come is a really good way of reaching out to people. Yeah, I think honestly the key thing that we get is actually, you know, I'm skipping over a lot of things because that is very specific to the city situation and our specific site. But I think the large thing is like going and talking to people, inviting them and having conversations with them. And then, you know, in our context, it's co-creating things. It's a non-profit, so we kind of put on events and things. And this might take some imagination to work out how it could work in different contexts. But actually, it's about co-creating experiences, co-creating things that people can come and engage with, rather than creating something for someone and asking them to come and join in. That's one of the biggest things I think that's come up for us. I'm just looking at my notes. Yeah, and then going back to what Flavia mentioned about kind of, and I think a few people have like dipped in this actually, and Uma, just talking about like creating an environment that's welcoming when you get there. So yes, this does, like, it's one thing turning up to somewhere, but then being an environment that isn't actually going to make you feel welcome or be able to meet your needs. That's one of the biggest things that people have highlighted, is being unsure about whether that's happening. So I think, you know, that's kind of being transparent about where you're at, even if you're not doing very well, just being brave enough to say, we're not doing great at this, but we're trying. That in itself is more welcoming than people that just refuse to talk about it. So just being really open with your learning experience and what's happening within your organization. Yeah.
Thank you, Esme. Has anyone else got anything they want to say about that? About inclusivity? Harriet?
I do, yeah. So I mentioned that I wrote a letter to my university, and one kind of barrier we felt when to kind of engage people in the conversation and engage alumni and students in to being more accepting and inclusive was also the reason that I actually wrote the letter, because I felt that there was a lot of momentum in June on people encouraging people to educate themselves on the Black Lives Matter movement and you know, read different books and things like that. But my concern was there were a proportion of people that I know, and not just older people my age from going to university, who just didn't care. And I think that's a huge barrier in that, and it was quite well put by someone who said, I'm not going to support your letter, I think what you're doing is fine, but I don't really care, because why are you saying that a student society should be actively anti-racist when I just want to drink with my friends? And it was, to me, that was something that was really shocking, because not everyone has the same opinion, that if someone says a racist comment or even just says something that you know, the microaggressions is another one, sort of says something very well intended, or but you know, needs to be challenged because it may make someone else feel uncomfortable. It's just, yeah, a real barrier we found was getting people to care, and sort of with that then also if kind of connecting with people, because if people very quickly disengage from the conversation if you can't, you know, had numerous conversations with my grandparents and things, and people do just disengage. And what I find an easier way to engage with people is just to say your opinion and not kind of and just your place, and that is a slight way of overcoming a barrier, rather than saying you should think this, even though sometimes you should. It's, yeah, it's just a difficult one, and I don't have the answer, but it's yeah, uncomfortable when people from your own community aren't engaged in something that is so important.
Thank you, Harriet. So yeah, that's a really interesting, good example of allyship. I think it's challenging, and I think the difficulty is people think that they need to make big change. You know, you've got to take it upon yourself to change the world, but actually look at your own circles. Just look at your dinner table and challenge just the people around your dinner table. And if everyone did that, then actually we would make huge gains. It doesn't have to be big and wonderful, which is interesting. So Uma, like at the vet school, for example, you know, are there similar sort of things going on, and how is the veterinary profession? You know, what sort of things have you seen going on there?
So I mean, we did similar things to Harriet within our veterinary society. we actually even went as far to put out a statement in June saying that we don't support any racism within our society, etc. And we had obviously some comments back from students being like, oh, if the society pursues this, like, we don't want to be part of this society anymore, like, this isn't really the realm that you should be entering as a veterinary society, which we kind of just ignored, because we didn't really care whether they supported us or not if they weren't going to support this statement, standing with Black Lives Matter, essentially. So yeah, we've been speaking with the vet school as a society, trying to discuss how we can potentially do more widening participation and outreach to encourage the veterinary community. But last year we completed research projects, and I know some of the research projects did look into sort of discrimination of students on placement, and essentially sort of the role of ethnicity and diversity within the veterinary community. And some of the results, I mean, for me, they shouldn't be quite surprising, because a lot of people, I think, within the veterinary community are obviously white, and they are more of the upper classes, so like middle class mainly. So they haven't really felt any sort of discrimination or problems, and it doesn't really directly affect them at all. So they don't really care. So a lot of the results in the discrimination thing was that a lot of students didn't feel like diversity and ethnicity in the veterinary community was a problem, and they also didn't see why it was a problem. And in fact, some of them took it so far to be, I guess, showing white fragility, where they felt if they flipped it in a way, so there's also a gender inequality in the veterinary community, and they would feel that maybe some of them, as a boy, they would feel really disheartened that they would be let in because they were a boy and not a woman who dominates the veterinary profession at the time. And they would feel similarly to that, as if we were letting in more ethnically diverse people over white people because we wanted to increase sort of diversity pool, which I guess is one of the big problems, because yeah, if you don't see it as a problem, you're not going to really help the problem at all. You're just sort of going to ignore the problem. And of course, like Esme was saying, inclusion, like when they're on placements and they get a negative thing, like I think you need to work harder to make people feel welcome and include them, to sort of give them the positive experience instead of like shutting that door immediately. And so yeah, I think it's really hard to say. Oh, someone's just sent a message. I think it's really hard to say how to sort of change it, but I think it's supposed to start really, for me, it's to start really early on, and sort of get people more interested into it and open to it. But it's hard to do, and it's hard to deal with when people aren't open to discussing the problem. Personally, I think because I'm a light-skinned person of colour, I haven't really had any issues other than microaggressions, particularly when I'm on placement as well, even from white people or people from other backgrounds. So like even European vets, recently I was just on placement and they would ask if I was studying in the UK because I didn't seem British because of my skin colour, because I looked quite tan, and this would be sort of a question that I'd be asked every couple of days, or where I was from is a common one as well. So yeah, I think sometimes the questions are from well-meaning perspectives and they don't realise that they're doing it, which is sort of the issue, because you can't educate someone who doesn't want to be educated. So the only people who want to take these opinions on board are the ones that are open to change, and if they're not open to change, then they're not going to do it. So like we feel like every student in our uni should have a training for ethnicity and diversity and inclusion, much like the staff do. But the problem is that obviously it can be turned into a tick box where they just do it to do the training that's compulsory, but they don't take it on board. And then if it's voluntary, the only people who are going to do it are the people that want to change and see that as a problem. So yeah, it's quite it's quite a long sort of thing to deal with, and you need to figure out when the sort of timeline you want to tackle it. So yeah, that's what I've been feeling like. Yeah.
Thank you, Emma. That's really interesting, and yeah, I think talking to a lot of vet students, I think that's quite a common thing in all the vet schools. And what really is interesting is if you look at the vet students and where they're facing discrimination, which placements they are, it's overwhelmingly farm placements, unfortunately, you know. And I've had vets question me, you know, oh no, you're just where's your papers and research? No, we talk to enough vet students. We're all, you know, I was a vet student one time, and actually that's where the issues are. So we need to address, you know, we know where the issues are. It's about addressing it, and actually people going, well, okay, rather than questioning it's a problem, just questioning, okay, we know it's a problem, how do you go about it? So I think the vet schools are looking at farm placements specifically because that's where a lot of issues are happening with regards to racism, especially when the vet schools are trying to support diversity and inclusion and increase the number of ethnic minority vets. They all have to go out to farms and see practice. So it is in the veterinary profession's interest and in agriculture to try and break down these barriers. Thank you, Emma. So Flavia, in your article, you talked about microaggressions, and I think some people, and Emma did mention a couple. So you know, we talk about racism not really just being, you know, it's like a pyramid, and we see the top bits, we don't see the bottom bits. Would you agree that that microaggressions is probably worse than the outward racism in farming, or not?
Yes. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And like you said earlier, I'd rather know, like, looking at America, you know that your neighbor is racist. Like, if you're on fire, they won't even pour a cup of water on you. You know that they don't like you, full stop. I'd rather deal with that than have someone that smiles at you, but then says a few comments like, oh, I don't know, you can do that because even if you do, it won't show on your skin, or have you ever seen snow before? Little things like that, or even getting nicknames like Darky. And I think because I've always had this mentality that as long as it's not a physical assault on me, words come in one ear and go out the other, so it doesn't bother me. But then deep down, for mental health side of things, like Esme said, deep down it just chips away at you slowly. And if you keep, like, I've had even playing rugby, because I'd say rugby and agriculture are always pretty close. Like any rural village would always have a like rugby team affiliated in them. And I've always had it in some teams where you go out after a beer, or after the game you have to go for a beer, and after a few drinks, the conversations always end up being, oh, you don't get offended by racism, do you? And I'm thinking, okay, how have we gone from talking about the game to now we're going down the cultural racism side? You make a few jokes, you guys are laughing, I'm not laughing because I don't think it's funny. And yeah, so I'd say microaggressions are definitely worse than outright racism, and a lot of people don't realize they're doing it because it's saying to someone, you can do this because that's what you do back home, isn't it? And I think, okay, have you been to Kenya? No. So where did you get that from? So it's just assumptions, as we said earlier, assumptions, and thinking that a certain group of people, because you saw one thing on YouTube or on the news somewhere, like you just class everyone as the same. And to me, when I talk about barriers, I'd say for me, I haven't found barriers necessarily because, like I said, any barrier that I've seen, I'll just try and jump over or dodge it, or find a way to make it a positive. But of late, I found, like, even let's say like on the day of Farm 24, you look on there and some of the posts going on these Instagram pages or Twitter, you're looking like, I posted something and I don't want to be in a position and asking someone to post it because you want people in the agriculture industry to see a different color, to see someone from a different background on there, so it becomes a norm. You don't see anything, and you think it's so easy for them to chuck a picture out there of, I don't know, Farmer Giles in the middle of Warwickshire or whatever, because that's normal. But seeing a picture of a black farmer, and there are a few out there, posted, it's almost like a treat, and it needs to go from that to be a norm. That if I see a picture of a black farm, I don't even blink. But then people see us, oh, they're just ticking in a box now, or they're just doing this. And it's the same for having our female farmers. It's getting better now because you got pages like Women in Ag and the hashtag Farm High and stuff like that. And I think that's improved. But another side of it is gay farmers and lesbian farmers. They're still sidelined. For you to see one posted online, you always get comments down there saying, "Oh, you're just ticking a box," or "Why are we gonna know what they're doing?" And it's like, they're human beings like you are. And if we're gonna go down the road of saying back British farming and stop any food from other countries coming here, the British UK or Britain as a country isn't just white. You have people in there that are from ethnic minorities. You're going to sideline them as a people on one hand, and then when you go to the supermarket, you want them to buy your food. How does that work? It doesn't make any sense. And then I saw there's a comment on there. Justina asked about how we'd like to, or how we could celebrate or honor different heritages in the industry we're working in. I'd say, because I work at a college, after COVID decides to disappear, or when it disappears, I've asked the question if we could go back to having schools from inner city London, which we used to, 2 or 3 times a week. Kids come down at the college and have a look on the farm, have a day here, get taken around all the dairy, because we've got dairy, we've got sheep, beef animals, we've got pigs, and also potentially in the summer, if we could do like a little summer camp. So even if it's kids, so the GCSE age, just that age where you could say if a kid's gonna derail, as it were, like I'll just use that as a time. If a kid was to get influenced to go bad way, you got that summer waiting to go to A levels or to work, get them down here for a week. They wouldn't have gone to the countryside, get them down doing activities. There's a local rugby club that I used to play for that have supported me quite well regarding the BLM thing. They printed "Say No to Racism" in this new season shirts, and also I managed to get a page on Mid Sussex Times to write an article about casual racism in rugby. And I think doing something like that in the summer outside of school, getting out of the 20 or 30 sort of teenagers in the countryside, get them even doing a day on the farm, they can play some rugby, play rounders or whatever, that experience will stick with someone for life. And that could be a gateway to having new people in farming, because one hand we're complaining that agriculture, the age is too high, we're not having new people in, kids of farmers want to go work in the city because they've grown up in the farm, want to do something different. And yet when you're having new people wanting to come in the industry, you think, oh, you're not from around here, or you're from a different culture, we don't want you here. You can't have your cake and eat it. It's either the agriculture industry goes down the pan because the age will keep going up, and it won't drop because there are not many young people coming in, or we change that, accept that we're living in a global village now. There's none of this. You go to a town and you only see I only see white people there. Like Brighton, which is where near I live, it's multicultural. London's multicultural. Bristol, I was in Bristol the other weekend. I think it's top 3 cities I've ever visited. It's unbelievable, the street art, so much culture there. So we're living in a world now that's very cultural. So yeah, we need to embrace culture and differences.
Perfect. No, thank you, Flavian. And I think you've raised a lot of interesting points there. So I think with regards to women in agriculture, we're getting more groups. So we've got Ladies in Beef, and we've got Women in Dairy, I think it's called, which have conferences and support women there. I think with regards to LGBT plus in agriculture, we've got Agri-Respect, who are championing that and role modeling. And I think with Race and Ethnicity, we've got BVED who are working, we've got Lion who are there, who are doing great work there, landing our names. We've got the LWA, the Land Workers Alliance, have now got a BPOC group who are trying to work on trying to improve the conversation and think about ways of dismantling these barriers and these issues. So there are some groups there, but there's probably not enough. And I think probably to sort of really bring things to a close, really, if everyone could just give me, 2 or 3 things that the industry can do, maybe improve things, or what's important for the industry to do. So if I go to Esme and we start that way, and what 3 things would you think is important?
Well, to kind of answer a question that's in the panel, I'll read it out because it won't show on the replay.
Sure.
Esme, earlier you mentioned that one barrier is common narratives about the countryside and agriculture and how it's being presented. Did your conversations and research identify alternative narratives and understandings? So that also touches on what Flavian was saying about representation. And I think it's kind of understanding that to people that don't belong inside agriculture, and also people that don't live in the countryside, there's a lot of rules to being in the countryside that are kind of common law rules, and just the countryside code and kind of things you're allowed to do, and there isn't right to roam, so people don't actually know where to go and how to go there, and it's stuff we take for granted if you've been in the countryside. But actually, particularly for people of colour, but even more so for Black people, going to the countryside just to visit the countryside, from our research, is actually a really terrifying experience, because not only are those rules that aren't publicly shared, I have, during the course of our research, I've spoken to a lot of people who said, I would never go to Cornwall on holiday because my friend went to Cornwall and it's like a 4-hour drive from Bristol, and my friend went to Cornwall and got stared at in the supermarket, called unsavory names. And it's like, it's kind of, how do we reduce those kind of, change the kind of, sorry, I got a little bit lost then. I guess what I'm trying to say is like being representative and clear with like communicating with people about the countryside. Like there are lots of signs up in the countryside, having places where even just, and I know this isn't directly related to agriculture but it totally is, because actually a lot of people we spoke to said, and people who were involved in agriculture, food growing, even just being in green spaces, all of them said that they'd had usually a white relative or neighbour or person in their life who had taken them to the countryside or gone gardening with them and giving them that sense of safety and education in order to be able to go there. So I think, to amplify what Flavian was saying, we kind of need to amplify who's already there doing stuff. We kind of need to double down on stuff that we already know, about how to behave, and we need to kind of elevate that. It's not like we're trying to, there's a real difference between tokenistically putting like Black people smiling in the countryside with a farmer's hat on in a poster for some kind of agricultural company, and actually just being really intentional about elevating those people that are there already, and just, inviting them to kind of be featured in things and kind of.
I agree. And I think it's also, we're not our colour. We've all got expertise in different things, and it's asking people of colour about those things rather than you asking them to always talk about being brown or Black. And I think elevating the voice that way is really, really key. No. Totally.
And other minority groups, like people.
Any minority group, any minority, but talking about what they are rather than what they look like.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Rather than being like, hi Black people, tell us about being a Black person in the countryside.
Yeah.
Hello person, tell us about what you do.
That's it. I completely agree. So no, so I think your point of raising the profile of people like that. So Harriet, what about you?
Can I just point out, sorry guys, can I just point out that there's also 2 more questions in the chat, which
sure.
maybe Nicola and Rupa, who've asked them, can jump in. Just wanting to raise that we don't close with
okay,
those
no
questions.
problem. So does somebody want to?
Yeah, shall I go ahead? So I put 2 questions. So trying to think which one. Yeah, it may have got mentioned actually whether or not an intersectional approach should be included more in the agricultural sector, because it's not just really about race, is it anymore? It's especially COVID has made us realise it's an intersection of our incomes as well as our colours and and so it's more of a point, I guess. The other thing I did want to raise was it seems like, in a really good way, decolonising has really reached a wider public audience this year, especially after the BLM protest. So I wondered, is there any scope at all for the people working on this in the agricultural sector to outreach to other groups, maybe in civil society, who are not necessarily working on agriculture, but are definitely working on decolonising? I know there's a movement in university teaching, for example, in general, to decolonise curriculums. So I just wanted to put that to the panel. Thank you. And really interesting talks as well. Thanks.
So does anyone want to answer that question?
Oh, Esme.
No, go. You go.
Well, intersectionality, I think you're spot on. It's such a, you see so many organisations sort of champion one thing, but how can you be a feminist if you're not, also if you're only championing the voice of white feminists and things like that. As scope, I think there are so many people. I think it's just actually channeling the energy. So at the Royal Agricultural University, I know they are working towards decolonising the curriculum, and I'm not sure how this is going because I've had to push quite hard. But I know there are lecturers there who are working towards it, and they're also, I think a really key thing is, I think is you can't fix the problem with the problem. I think you need to draw on external experience, and again, that's why intersectionality is so important, because you can use people's own experience in their narrative to kind of build momentum completely. So yeah, I think there is, but I think the sort of barrier towards that is getting each individual involved, yeah, I think, I'm not sure how, but discussions like this are a great start.
Yes, Smee.
Yeah, this is just in response to the intersectionality portion of the question. I genuinely believe, and if we kind of look at privilege as a spectrum, I think, like Black people are probably at the you've got kind of white privilege with, maybe if you look at the intersectionality of like a white person with great generational wealth at the top, and perhaps a Black trans working class person at the bottom. So, where all the intersections stack up. I think, our entire structure, and I think, it's really important here to acknowledge racism as a system, because I think people get very caught up in their own emotions about what that means about them. And that kind of, that's when the fragility feelings come up, and that blocks them from actually being like, I'm a part of this system that exists. It's a very well structured system. And I think it's about seeing kind of people who fall, so it's first divesting yourself from, like, personally, separating yourself from where you fit into that system, so you can look at it as a system instead of kind of the personal feelings that come up with that. And then the kind of the intersectionality piece is, if we look at kind of privilege and the full spectrum of it, liberation of the people that fall at the bottom of the pile of privilege is the key to liberating everybody else. So yes, we should think about this in terms of what I was speaking before about, the concept of inclusion is talking about everybody. But if we start at the place where we're doing the worst, which is race, and, especially if we look at the layered intersectionalities of like the Black identity with other marginalized identities, we start there, that's the key to unlocking the rest of the stuff, because that's where it's focused. And in our country, we just have a massive history of, it's built on colonialism and power structures. That's my short answer to that.
Yes, Matt.
So for me, with intersectionality, particularly with the vets, I think it's really closely related to economic wealth, and how they're able to afford to go to these places, and how they're able to afford having like their own car and driving lessons and being able to take themselves to these places really easily, because obviously usually agricultural like farms and stuff are not really, they're not often city farms, they're usually quite in the middle of nowhere, and unless you kind of have the access to it personally, then you can't really get there yourself unless you're taking long routes of public transport. But also like for me, for what I've noticed, the people that are entering into farm veterinary are the people that have worked on farms when they were younger or grown up on farms. It's just a continuation of the line rather than more new people entering it. And I think it's just dependent on obviously where you live in that point, whether you live near to these people that you could meet and have access to it, which is obviously make it so much easier because you also don't need to drive there or long distances. So yeah, also, I mean, the people that are also entering veterinary are usually grammar school or private school people. So I think that's the other intersectionality that goes in towards the wealth. So I think it just needs to be a bit more open, a bit more easily accessible. Like if you're gonna have people visit, then how sort of costly or expensive is it to have people to come? And how long can you like accommodate them for? What can you actually provide for them in return? Like, is it going to be for the people that are not poorer but are less likely to be able to do that themselves, or is it, you know, just for people who have a bit more affordability for it?
Perfect, thank you. So that's great. I'm a bit wary of time, so I think we need to draw it to a close. So I think I'm sure we could have chatted for hours on this subject. There were so many more things to chat about, but to be honest, we're never going to be able to answer everything, talk about everything, because it's such a complex subject. But I hope it's been sort of interesting. I hope it's sort of raised a few questions, actually, raised some interests, and I think, you know, I think also it's actually quite fitting because it's Black History Month, and it's a time to celebrate and to learn and to understand more about Black people and what they contribute and what they've done, and it's a good time to maybe think about trying to educate yourself and finding resources. Now, it shouldn't only be restricted to this month, it should be all 12 months, but if maybe today or this month is the time to start, then that's great. So you look at resources, educate yourself. We talk about allyship, and allyship is about yourself. You don't rely on other people to do it for you. So to find areas and find places and find people and learn. And organisations as well. There are plenty of organisations out there, and I think the question was quite good because we can learn from other organisations outside of agriculture as well and bring that knowledge in, because, you know, we're not experts here and we need help as well. I found a good tweet, I think it was yesterday, about Black History Month and what people should be doing, and they've summed it up in 3 words. It's all about education, leadership and justice, and I think those are the 3 things that, you know, as a sector we need. I think it's a little bit easier if I compare it to the veterinary sector, because it's a profession. It's much easier to do those sort of things. With agriculture, who are the leaders? Who are the influencers who can make that change? Find where the education is, and remember, this is justice. This is people who haven't had an opportunity to have opportunities, and to support them and to grow this industry. And with diversity comes the benefits, the moral benefits. You know, we talk about mental health. It really helps having such a diverse way of thinking about things and sorting out problems. It has the, you know, the business objectives, you know, more profitability, more productivity. And also the legal aspect. And if you think about companies, you know, we've got the Equality Act 2010, and that's all about, you know, making sure that everyone's equal, and equity. So not everyone has started at the same stage. So remember, you know, we can't always say, well, if they open the gates, everyone's got access, because we need to help some people that have got further barriers. So I want to thank the panel, and I found it really interesting, and I always learn so much more by hearing you guys. So thank you very much for taking your time out, and I hope everyone else we'll thank the panel. I really appreciate it. So thank you. Thank you to the Northern Real Farming Conference for hosting this. I hope that the conversation carries on. and I'm sure we can, you know, if you put your details, if you want to, on the chat, if people want to get hold of you, then that would be great to carry on the conversation. So thank you, everyone, and I hope you have a great weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.